It literally is a point now where I think we have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. That is truly where we are. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. It is eroding the core foundations of how people behave by and between each other. Your behaviors, you don't realize it, but you are being programmed.
Thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them to really understand it, that thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you, more likes and comments. I mean, it's a social validation feedback loop that it's like it's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology.
The constant feedback loop. So when you watch the television isn't watching you. When you see the billboard isn't seeing you. And vast numbers of people see the same thing on television and see the same billboard. When you use these new designs, social media, search, YouTube, when you see these things, you're being observed constantly, and algorithms are taking that information and changing what you see next. And they're searching and searching and searching, and they're just blind robots. There's no evil genius here until they find those patterns, those little tricks that get you and make you change your behavior.
The unintended consequences of a network when it grows to 1 billion or 2 billion people, and it literally changes your relationship with society, with each other, with it probably interferes with productivity in weird ways. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains.
This is wiring your brain for super fast feedback. It's the same brain you're using to build a company. Don't think they're not the same. Do you know what I'm saying? No? Yes? No? Yes! Yes, right? You have one brain. So you're training your brain here, whether you think it or not, whether you know it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not. Acknowledge that these things where you're spending hours a day are rewiring your psychology and physiology in a way that now you have to use to go and figure out how to be productive in the commercial world. So if you don't change this, you are going to get the same behaviors over here.
They intentionally included addictive schemes in their designs. Now, we have to say, this is what I would call almost a stealthy addiction. It's a statistical addiction. What it says is, we will get the broad population to use the services a lot. We'll get them hooked through a scheme of rewards and punishment. And the rewards are when you're retweeted. The punishment is when you're treated badly by others online. And then within that, we'll very gradually start to leverage that to change them. So it's this very kind of stealthy manipulation of the population. So it's not as dramatic as a heroin addict or a gambling addict, but it is the same principle.
We curate our lives around this perceived sense of perfection because we get rewarded in these short-term signals, hearts, likes, thumbs up, and we conflate that with value, and we conflate it with truth. And instead, what it really is fake, brittle popularity that's short-term and that leaves you even more, and admit it, vacant and empty before you did it. Because then it forces you into this vicious cycle where you're like, what's the next thing I need to do now? Because I need it back. Think about that compounded by 2 billion people. And then think about how people react then to the perceptions of others. It's really bad. It's really, really bad.
So what's happening in America, and I know it's happening the same in Britain and Canada, I haven't looked at other places yet, haven't dug into those stats. What's happening is that rates of depression and anxiety were fairly stable from the 90s through the early 2000s. And what you see here is that the percentage of kids aged 12 to 17 in America who met the criteria for having a major depressive episode. The rate for boys is around 5%, and then around 2011 it starts going up, and now it's around 7%, which is actually a somewhat substantial increase. But as you can see in the graph, the line for girls, right around 2011, 2012, starts going up, and it goes way up to the point where it goes up from about 12% to now about 20% of American teenage girls have had a major depressive episode in the last year, 1 in 5. Now let's look just at college students. So this is more selective. These are kids who've made it into college. And what we see is that in 2010 and 2012, when college students were all millennials, the rates were pretty low. We see about 2 to 3% of the boys, the college men, and about 5 to 6% of college women say yes to that question. That's when it was millennials. But beginning in 2013, Gen Z begins arriving. That's kids born in 1995. Gen Z begins arriving. And so by 2016, colleges are almost all Gen Z, and the rates shoot up, way up. Some people say, oh, come on, you guys are catastrophizing. The increase isn't real. It's just that, this generation, they're really comfortable talking about mental illness. And so the fact that they say they're depressed just means they're comfortable. It doesn't mean that there's an epidemic. Perfectly reasonable argument. Is it true? Well, let's look at behavior. So what this graph shows is the number of boys out of 100,000 who are admitted to a hospital every year because they deliberately harmed themselves to the point where they had to be hospitalized. And what you see here is that there's no change over time. So boys, these graphs from 2001 to 2015, the lines are flat for all the different age groups. And just notice that the highest rates are around 280 out of 100,000 per year. That's the situation for boys. The situation for girls is really, really different. If we look at self-harm, what you see here is that the rates were fairly stable up until 2009. And then, bang, just as in the last same thing. The rates for girls go shooting up. So the rate for 15 to 19-year-old girls is up 62% since 2009. Now notice the rate for the millennials, that is the rate for the oldest girls, age 20 to 24, that's only up 17%. So whatever happened, it's not affecting the millennials, it's affecting Gen Z. The rate for the youngest girls, check that out. Now the youngest girls, these are 10 to 14-year-old girls. These are preteens. Okay, they didn't used to cut themselves. They used to have very low rates. But bang, beginning in 2010, it shoots up. It's up 189%. It has nearly tripled in the last 5 or 6 years. Because of the huge sex difference, the leading candidate and the timing, look at that timing, is social media.
There have been dozens of studies at this point, including studies released by Facebook scientists. So this is something we can call a consensus. And when Facebook releases such things, they say, oh, but we do all these good things too that balance it. But there's a general acknowledgement that depression correlates. The scariest example is a correlation between rises in teen suicide and the rise in use of social media. So when the company's own scientists are publishing on this topic and come to the same agreement, I think it's time to say this is real.